The question we're going to ask today is, can the best deck get even better? And unfortunately, the answer is yes and no, but there's definitely some obvious upgrades, and we're going to start with them right now. At the 2 converted mana cost, these are flash flyers for 2. You could say that they are just Welkin Terns with flash, except they're more than that. They are Welkin Terns with flash that can block ground guys, which Welkin Tern cannot do. Dimensional Infiltrator is a Welkin Tern with flash that blocks ground guys that also sometimes gets to save itself from dying if you can spend a 1 and a colorless to bounce it back to its hand, maybe. And Rattle Chains is the same thing, except sometimes it gives another Spirit Hexproof, which is probably not going to be relevant in this deck. The Spirit Affinity probably will not matter, but it is probably, these 2 cards are just going to replace all the Welkin Terns. So that is a pretty obvious upgrade. But there's some other stuff to discuss to make Simic Tempo even better. This is not one of them. This is just a card everyone's really excited about. It's an expensive card in Paper Magic, and I do not foresee this going in the deck, but I thought I'd mention it in case people are curious. What about Thing in the Ice? Really good against aggro, and if you have enough spells, and we actually almost have enough spells to trigger this thing. I do feel that I often will, in an average win, cast 3 to 7 spells, which means sometimes we'd be able to do this, but sometimes is not good enough, and we are an aggro deck, and this sure as shit does not attack for a while. So we'll not use it, but it's worth mentioning in case people are curious. This is a card that is quite powerful, but probably goes in control and not tempo. At the 3 converted mana cost spot, we've got some thoughts to ponder over. One of them is Tireless Tracker. This card is really good, but the question is Tireless Tracker better than Jhessian Thief, which is a 1/3 prowess that when it deals damage to a player, draws a card. The advantage that Tireless Tracker has over Jhessian Thief is that it can draw a card without having to attack. And it also has a better power, but it probably dies in it will die in combat a lot too. But because they both have trouble getting in, Tireless Tracker is better at drawing cards. The drawback to that is that the way it draws cards is through Investigate and Clues. And when you play a land, you get to Investigate, which means you get a clue, and that token can be sacrificed for 2 mana to draw a card. So there's a little more work to be put in, but the fact that you get these clues for playing lands is pretty reasonable, and our deck is a deck that, I mean, at least my version of Simic Tempo is not one that has drawn cards. It is kind of just aggroed out and tempoed out people. But if we happen to be getting into this clue plan, Daring Sleuth is a reasonable addition, even though it's not a 3 converted mana cost. I put it on this page just so I could talk about it with Tireless Tracker. It is a 2 mana creature where if you sacrifice a clue, you get to transform it, and it becomes a 3/2 prowess, which is fairly strong. And when it deals combat damage to a player, you get to Investigate, which means maybe draw more cards. I don't know how many times you can sacrifice a clue in a reasonable game, but I feel like you'll be able to find 1 to 4 windows in which to draw some cards. And if you happen to get a bunch of clues and you haven't sacrificed any of them when they board wipe you, sometimes you're going to be able to just draw 3 or 4 cards in 2 turns and get right back into the game. So having these things sitting around for a rainy day isn't a bad place to be. And I feel like if I added Tireless Tracker, I would strongly consider adding Daring Sleuth as well. Another mild consideration on the flip card train is this Uninvited Geist. It's worth consideration because its flip side says 3/3 unblockable, which basically says 3/3 flying, but even better. But a 2/2 for 3 is a little bit iffy. It has Skulk, which is sometimes it has unblockable if your opposing creatures are too big or non-existent. But if this was costed 2, I would play it probably guaranteed. I feel like having it cost 3 is a little bit tall of an order. I just don't see it happening, but I might try it and see how it works in practice. But I feel like a 2/2 for 3 is just not big enough when we already have 3/3s for 3 and flying 2/1s. That we have a lot of stuff going on 3. I don't really see it happening, but it is a possibility. The last possibility is Stitched Mangler. This is worse actually than Frost Lynx because it comes in tapped. But it does the exact same thing Frost Lynx does, which is freeze a guy when it comes into play, and it costs the same, and it has more toughness. Usually when we play Frost Lynx, we're trying to block 2 things, meaning we tap down one guy and we chump block with Frost Lynx, and we keep getting in the air with our flyers. This does not get to block, so taking half of that utility away is bad. It's especially noticeable if it's something that we needed to block, like a 5/5 or something. But it is a zombie, and incidentally it's also a horror, so if you played Thing in the Ice, it doesn't get bounced by Thing in the Ice, which is kind of funny because maybe you want to play it again to freeze again. But it is a zombie, which is a little more relevant to what I'm going to talk about on this next page, which is compelling deterrence over here on the right. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, which is exactly what Disperse says, except it has more. Then that player discards a card if you control a zombie. Well, if you happen to control a Stitched Mangler and you play compelling deterrence instead of Disperse, which we probably will, just in case, because it is strictly better, you get to make them discard a card, which is not nothing. On the other side here, we got Ongoing Investigation. Now, Ongoing Investigation, whenever any of our guys deal damage to a player, we get a clue token. And that's not bad. I definitely think you can end up with too many clue tokens, but I wouldn't mind a cheap way to start drawing cards. And this is actually a cheap way to start drawing cards. 2 mana. We can play it on turn 4 and attack and get some clues and sack them, with our 2 remaining mana open. And the 1 and a green activation at the bottom is actually not irrelevant, because if we are playing against mono red aggro and they start burning our things to get in, we can start trading in those guys that they burned for 2 life, and we get a clue out of it too. We might actually just crawl right back into the game 2 life at a time. Essence Flux I'm actually really excited about. Exile target creature you control, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it's a spirit, put a 1/1 counter on it. Now we're probably only going to have 1 spirit. There is another spirit that's a 2/1 flyer prowess. That's a maybe. I didn't put it on here because I didn't think it would make the cut, but it might. But the real relevant thing is that it exiles target creature you control and returns it to the battlefield under our control, which means we have our Bounding Krasis. They go to kill it. We Essence Flux in response. We save our guy. It basically counter spells for 1 mana against creature removal. And then it comes back to the battlefield and taps down another one of their guys, or untaps another one of our guys. Or we bounce Frost Lynx and freeze another one of their guys at instant speed. Or we bounce Eldrazi Skyspawner and make another token and save it from dying. This does a lot of stuff, and it doesn't matter if we get a 1/1 counter on a spirit. We're definitely playing Rattle Chains, so we might. This is a good card. It's almost like Cloud Shift. The only difference is Cloud Shift said return that card to the battlefield under your control, which is only relevant with like active treason effects, because you could have active treasoned, taken it to your side, Cloud Shift it, now you just own that card. Whereas this one says it's owner's control, so if you active treasoned, they would actually get it back after Essence Flux because they own that card. But that's not relevant for us because we don't have active treason in this deck anyway. Grip of the Royal. you know, we have adverse conditions that cost 4 and taps 2 guys. This costs 3, taps 1 guy, and lets us draw a card, and sometimes it costs 2. This card is better than adverse conditions, but I would still like a split. I feel like I might cut 2 adverse conditions and put 2 Grip of the Royal in its place, because I feel like earlier in the game we're fine to tap 1 guy and we want to draw a card, but late in the game when they get more things out and we still need to do a little bit more damage, still having 1 adverse conditions to get 2 guys I still like as a curve topper at 4. So we'll probably have a split, but Grip of the Royal ain't bad. Just the Wind is not good for us. First of all, it says return target creature to its owner's hand. It does not say permanent. And sometimes we want to bounce a Planeswalker and then counterspell the Planeswalker if we didn't have the mana to counterspell it before, or for whatever reason we need to get that Planeswalker back into their hand for a counterspell. We would rather it say permanent. Disperse says permanent. Compelling Deterrence says permanent. And so Just the Wind is probably not going to make the cut for us. It's probably going to be in a blue-red type of thing where there's going to be more discard, or a blue-black. But Compelling Deterrence is one that we're going to keep an eye on. And Just the Wind we're going to pass on for a similar effect. But speaking of zombies, this might be something. You know, this would get possibly a second zombie into the deck so that they can discard more often off that bounce spell. This also flies, and it also activates the discard thing, funnily enough, although I don't suspect we'll be just the winding people. You know, discarding for 2, or discarding 2 cards for 2 and returning this from the graveyard to the battlefield is pretty good effect against control. Pack Guardian. It's a little rough on our mana with double green. We're almost a mono blue deck. We just have just enough green to get by, and this is double green. And I mean, look, man, it's got flash, and you can discard a card to get you can discard a land when you flash this in and get a 2/2 wolf. That's 6/5 power flash. I mean, if you want to kill somebody that thinks they're going to attack you and switch the game into your favor, this 4 mana spell as a curve topper in our aggro deck might be something that fits the bill, even though it does not fly. It's a strong consideration. I'd have to fix the mana a little bit to make it a little more green, but that is a good consideration. Is it better than Whirler Rogue at 4? I'm not sure about that. It provides a completely different effect than Whirler Rogue, and it is better than Whirler Rogue in some situations and worse in others. It's certainly better on defense, but it is worse on offense, because Whirler Rogue gets to push in our ground guys or blocked flyers for free right when it comes down, and this does not. Saddleback Lagak. I'm not going to put this in, but it is worth consideration as a curve topper. Like, you play flyers on turn 2, you play a flyer on turn 3, you make those flyers bigger on turn 4, and you got a blocker on the ground that probably trades with something, and you also can use the that 1 mana return to the battlefield under its owner's control effect to get 2 more support out of this. You can block and cast that spell and bring it back to the battlefield and support 2 again. Like, you can do a little bit of stuff with Saddleback Lagak, and it's worth consideration. I may try it and see what happens and then report back to you in a future video. Planeswalkers. We've got none of them in our deck right now, but these are worth consideration. Jace, because his -2 bounces a guy, even though it's on turn 5. If we are put in a situation against control, drawing cards is good. And, you know, it's a maybe. It's a little expensive. I want to be more aggro. But this is not bad. I mean, bouncing things is one of the things we want to do, and drawing cards is something we have not been able to do. So, you know, it's on the radar. Nissa, Voice of Zendikar, is a little more on the radar because she's cheaper, but she does have the double green issue, so I'd have to fix the mana again. But -2, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. That means Scions, that means the flyers we have. I mean, that's a pretty good effect, even if she just dies right afterwards. You know, sometimes we have like, you know, 4 flyers and they're all 2 power, and now they're all 3 power. Like, you can just win the game an entire turn early because you have this. And I'm not saying she's a home run. I mean, her +1 makes a 0/1 green plant creature. That could not be more opposite of what we're trying to do. I mean, we get to block 1 time maybe, but the -2 is the real deal. And any game where we can finagle away to -2 more than once is going to be a pretty tough game for our opponents to win. And the ultimate, for whatever it's worth, which I never foresee ever using, is amazing. Is you just gain a ton of life and draw a ton of cards. But that's not going to happen. The last thing I want to talk about is colorless effects. Vile Redeemer could have just been talked about in the 3-drop spot, but it's a flash 3/3, and it has a colorless effect where you get an Eldrazi Scion if a creature you control died this turn. Well, non-token creature. The weird thing is right now the only way that we have to pay this cost of colorless mana is sacrificing an Eldrazi Scion. Well, the bonus for paying this colorless effect is we get an Eldrazi Scion, so that actually does nothing. But it is a flash 3/3 flyer for 3, and I wouldn't mind having more of those. Side note about colorless mana is that it's like having a third color. Like, you have to make a concerted effort to pay colorless costs. That means playing wastes. That means playing, you know, artifacts that create colorless. I mean, for whatever reason, you need to figure out a way to pay a mana cost that isn't green or blue. And that can be additionally taxing on us if we're trying to cast Whirler Rogues and some of the double green things that I talked about. And, you know, Thought-Knot Seer costs colorless. But Thought-Knot Seer, you know, it's at that 4-drop spot. We're talking the top of our aggro curve where our opponent reveals their hand. We choose the best card from it. You know, we play a flyer on turn 2, a flyer on turn 3. We play Thought-Knot Seer on turn 4, look at their hand and say, this card is the one that's going to beat me. This is the card that's going to kill my things. Take it out of their hand and put a 4/4 on the board. We get to attack again with our guys, and now they have to draw another thing or have another thing that deals with our flyers. And this kind of effect, you know, in an aggro curve is just as good as an effect you get in a mid-range and even a control curve. Like, if this is the last thing we play on a 2-3-4 curve, perfectly reasonable. And the thing I like about it is that we can sack a Scion if we don't draw wastes. Not that I'd want to rely solely on 4 copies of Eldrazi Skyspawner to cast this really important card. I would not exclusively do that, but it might be worth messing with the mana base just to try and get in a Thought-Knot Seer, which I think will be one of the more impactful cards in a format that has not allowed us to yet look at an opponent's hand and start taking things out of it, which is a very important effect that sees play in every format that it's in for cheaper than 4 mana. You know, we don't get a 4/4 body usually, but, you know, this being the first effect that is like this in Magic Duels, I think it's going to see a high impact. It's going to be just a high impact, highly played card in a lot of decks, and it might go in what is currently the best deck in order to fight what will be the new best deck. So we'll see how that shakes out. But let's try some games right now and see if I can remember to talk about how some of the cards I just talked about would apply in certain situations in some games. So the main thing about tempo is that the whole point is having threats that have you ahead, and tempo lets you keep doing what you're doing while they're replaying things to catch up. It's about making them play catch up. That's why replacing, even though Welkin Tern is fine because you can play it so early, but replacing Welkin Tern with Flash 2/1 flyers for 2 is supremely valuable. Flash in tempo is the most important thing you can be doing, and it's unfortunate that our opponent is leaving here, but it's okay for the sake of this discussion. We don't have a Welkin Tern here, but this is fine. Basically, anytime you can play every single thing at instant speed, it means you're always protected. In fact, the more instant speed things you play, the more instant speed creatures you have, the more counter spells you can play without losing or getting crazily behind because all you have is counter spells. Because you can either play a creature or play a counter spell all the time, which is pretty valuable. When you play 3-drops that don't have flash, like Eldrazi Skyspawner and Jhessian Thief, what happens is your opponent gets to play things while you have no mana up. And sometimes that means that they get to play a kill spell that's going to kill you from, stop you from doing the damage you want to do the next turn. And sometimes that means playing a blocker that's bigger than a 1/3. Sometimes it means playing Acid Moss. In this case, it just happens to mean playing this Nissa Vastwood Seer, which is fine. We're going to try and draw and succeed at that. So all the things that I talked about at the front of the video, they're not like guaranteed changes outside of the Welkin Terns becoming Infiltrator and the ghost dude, Rattle Chains. Some of the other ideas I like in there, but nothing is truly guaranteed until we see how it all shakes out. I would like to play something besides Disperse. I don't know if I would rather play something besides Clutch of Currents. This is actually a pretty nice tempo play, because sometimes bouncing a guy and getting a creature, especially if it's one with haste, is bonkers beyond belief. We're gonna make a really conspicuous attack and pass here. If they Acid Moss here, we're in a little bit of trouble. But if he attacks with the Nissa Vastwood Seer, we might get him. It might have been better to tap down the Gate Creeper Vine, but I didn't do it. Mainly because he could play something else. He has 7 cards. Sure. Everything is dead. So this is a perfect example. Like, we have the Bounding Krasis, but this situation is perfect. You have your counterspell, and you have your Bounding Krasis, or your creature of any kind. He plays a giant threat, we get to counterspell. This is what you want in tempo. Not every tempo deck has to have flash creatures, but the ones that do have a lot of exciting plays to make. I think the thing that would beat us here is probably a Gaia's Revenge, but it's not guaranteed to beat us. The main reason that it would be tough is because he's so high on health. Usually we've attacked many times by now and got in. Liliana is okay. Even if he kills something. Even if he kills everything. So double Radiant Flames is pretty good against our deck because we have a lot of low toughness things, but we're going to try and blow up his Liliana. with the same exact ambush we had last time. And he fell for it again. Hopefully he doesn't have an answer. He was probably thinking, he can't really have another Bounding Krasis. Maybe. I don't want to think somebody is that reckless. We did it to him once, and we did it to him again. This is a really annoying card. It's not so bad for us, but it is annoying. Evolutionary Leap. Really good against control, which is not what we are. A-okay. See, one thing I would like that enchantment for, I forget the names of them all, but it's the enchantment that when we do damage to them we get to investigate is if it was on board at some point during this game. Well, now he's threatening Ulamog now. But if that enchantment was on board at some point during this game when we had 2 mana available, these attacks that he just lets through, he would no longer let through. He'd be afraid of us getting clues, so we'd be able to disperse and do things like that and start getting him badly. But without that, they can take a lot of damage, especially if he's going to gain 6 life like that. My honest to God fear is that he will Ulamog right this second and win the game. So yeah, he's quite a bit ahead of us. 20 to 20. It's a tough one. We're gonna give it our best shot. So what we do here is we bounce this. Then we tap Ulamog down. It's going to be pretty hard to do this much damage, especially without flyers. He certainly Radiant Flames plenty of them. Well, I guess he only got 2, but he did Radiant Flames a number of our guys. We're going to take 1 attack if he wants it. Perfectly fine. I want to tap down his next blocker. Oh, that is horrendous for us. That's just more blockers. Alright, I'm not going to flash in the Bounding Krasis. What we're going to do is just keep doing what we're doing. I'm going to make him replay this. If he wants to sacrifice it, that's fine. I don't want to fight the tokens is the problem. Replays. Goes into combat, we tap. We can't play Whirler Rogue until next turn. I'm going to let him Evolutionary Leap. That's fine. Priest of the Bloodright's pretty annoying. Hopefully he'll pre-combat play that priest. He did. That's annoying. He just played 10 mana worth of things again. He's getting a Radiant Flames probably. Oh, and Nissa's Renewal. Well, this guy had a lot of stuff. That's for sure. So he's going to gain a bunch. That's annoying. So he's going to gain 6 and go to 11, and he's going to have 1 blocker. If he plays Nissa's Renewal and a creature, I think we might lose. In fact, we will lose. That actually might have made us lose. Because now he has a... Yeah, now... I don't know what we need. We need a bounce spell. Actually, we might need another adverse conditions at this rate. That was pretty bad. That was quite terrible. Maybe the worst thing ever. Even that is not enough. We lose to Ulamog. Well, my deck's designed to beat ramp decks, and we didn't win. So that's what happened. We lost. It's close though. You know, I mean, ramp is just the most popular and common thing, and we got. But we actually lost to the Radiant Flames. We didn't lose to Ulamog, even though we lost to Ulamog. Like, he actually was going to win because of the mill effect of Ulamog, but we lost mainly because he Radiant Flames us twice, and he Nissa's Renewaled us twice. And he had that land destruction at the end. Unfortunate. Rank 38. It's pretty low. This is not great. I feel like 2 adverse conditions is a little much. There's another ramp deck. Let's see if we can beat it this time. That is why I made this deck and why it's usually so successful. I don't think that I would cut Skyrider Elf, which is basically a 2/2 flyer in this deck, for the flash ones. I think I'll only cut Welkin Terns for it. The Skyrider Elf is fine. You do want a critical mass of 2-drop flyers if you can. I've actually wondered if I would actually just cut Whirler Rogues and Jhessian Thieves for the flyers and leave the turns in. Because the more turn 2 plays you have, you know, the more often you can just leave up a counter spell. I may even just add counter spells because we get more flash guys. I don't usually like to play a ton of counter spells, and it's weird playing counter spells in an aggro deck, but we're gonna give it a shot, I think. I'll try a bunch of different builds when the new sets come out. We'll see what happens. We're in a very bad position when it comes to getting acid mossed here, because he will certainly kill this man land. He's also gaining a lot of life. This is not the best start, having our thing get killed and having him still be able to play this spell. That was a pretty good sequence for him, his Twin Bolt into Nissa's Pilgrimage. He has had a 1-drop, a 2-drop, a 3-drop, and now I assume... Ooh, that's weird. This is a burn spell that is bound to kill our thing, so that's interesting. Hopefully we get a way to blow that up. Like a bounce. It's not a bounce. I've never seen a ramp deck with this, but they are ramping because of this. So I don't know what's going on. Acid Moss. Ridiculous. I could have done without that. I was quite sure he would have Acid Moss this last turn. I'm not sure what Ember Hauler was doing. I'm desperate to draw, so I'm going to try and draw. We have plenty of adverse conditions, so may as well. I'm really looking forward to Acid Moss being out of the format. Not because it's unbeatable. I've beaten it more often than I've lost to it, but I've also lost to it in ways that are infuriating, meaning completely not playing a game of Magic. Like 100% 0 games of Magic played. Like, absurd. Did not get to cast anything worthwhile. Did not get to do anything worthwhile. I've been in games where my opponent had 18 lands and I had 1 or 2. I also want to note that while I have a few decks myself that play Acid Moss, I don't do degenerate levels of ramp like a lot of people do. By the way, he is out of burn spells. You can tell because the game automatically chose for him to tap 2 red lands. That's a nice trick. Yeah, that happened. The game chooses red lands for him because he only has green spells. And as a result, he doesn't get to do what he wants to do. I think I'm gonna just attack with this stuff. And put another flyer in the air. I don't feel super confident about ambushing his Majoring Bully right now. He may actually have pump spells in this deck for all I know. Green pump spells, wild size and stuff. Certainly will not block. If he has a Titan Strength or something, we're at 20. So that's okay. Wild size, called that. I've never seen a deck like this that is ramping and using Rolling Thunder Burn and is having this aggro. This is a very weird deck. This is not common. I'm gonna get in with a whole slew of dudes. The main thing about things like adverse conditions is you can count on stopping your opponent's damage, so it's best to get them as low as possible. And when they think that they're finally going to block, you make it so they can't block. And that is the essence of tempo. Is they're behind, and then suddenly they're like, okay, I gotta stop them, and they can't stop you because you've got mono open and they don't. I'm actually going to take this again. I'm a little concerned about... We lose to Chandra's Ignition. I do not want to be Chandra's Ignition at all. Four, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Chandra's Ignition would be lucky. It's not unreasonable, but it would be lucky because he hasn't seen that many cards in his deck. And to just happen to have that would be quite lucky of him. We will not block again and see what happens. Wild Size. That's actually good. Titanic Growth. I'm not sure we're dead. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What, we're at 3? Winner, winner, as they say. Time to eat some chickens. Time to get them chickens. Got 'em. Interesting that we lost the game that was not against an actual opponent, by the way. That's ramp for you. Ramp is a mindless strategy, much like how mono red is a mindless strategy. That's why they're the two most popular decks. That's not a slight against anybody. Especially since I sometimes play those decks. But they are the easiest decks to play with because you don't have to think. With red, you just play things and attack and attack and attack, and if you have enough things, you win, and if you don't, you lose. And ramp is you ramp and ramp and ramp and ramp, and you play a giant thing, and if they can't kill indestructible 10/10s, then they lose, and that's all it is. There are ways to fight both of those strategies, but it's really hard to sideboard against one or the other in the same deck because there is no sideboard. You have to kind of mainboard silver bullet as many things as you can, is what they call it. You put a couple one-ofs in here and there just to see if you can do what you need to do. That hand was actually reasonable, by the way, but not exactly where I wanted to be. Once you play your own decks enough, you start getting a feel for what's good enough and what's not good enough. And both my colors and 3 lands and being able to play all the spells seemed like enough, but Frost Lynx is kind of a spell to me. Frost Lynx is there to push things in, but a 2/2 for 3 does not usually get in very, very nicely. You know, it's not a smooth transition. I could easily get counterspelled, but we'll try it, because what else are we going to do? Do nothing? Sometimes I get horribly awry'd. I hate it, but it happens. 2 mana counterspell. Blue-white is very, very often some version of control. This is a almost guarantee to be a counterspell, so we're not going to do it this time. We're just going to go for 3. What we're going to try and save this Spell Shrivel for is something critical. Something like Planar Outburst, or the thing that bounces all our stuff if it's at a critical time when we have a lot of things on board. He's definitely trying to counterspell us, and I may let him. I feel like if he does not counterspell this here, he's setting up for the Planar Outburst, which we want. But if he does counterspell us here, then we get a counterspell out of his hand. Spell Shrivel. Perfectly fine. I'm going to play this other Skyspawner. If you planar outbursts us here, it's really, really, really bad. But I'd rather get more power on the board. Now he's on a 3-turn clock instead of a 5-turn clock. That's much better. Gideon's Reproach. That's fine. 5-turn clock it is. I didn't want to disperse into his counterspell mana there. We may need this later. What I want here is a Bounding Krasis. That's not very good. So right now he's on a 3-turn clock. If we play Frost Lynx against nothing, he's on a 2-turn clock. We're going to try it, because it's pretty inconsequential otherwise. Looks like he's considering not... Oh, he is going to do it. Okay. I didn't like that card much anyway. I'd rather resolve a better creature. I also don't want to Spell Shrivel just any old thing. We're still ahead. Adverse Conditions is also not very good in this particular situation. Gideon's Reproach. We will try and save our guy this time. He calculated dismissal too late. I don't know what to do here. 7-turn clock is definitely not where we want to be, but we can pay for calculated dismissal. I think it's worth it. Now he's back on a 2-turn clock. Planar Outburst. Now we Spell Shrivel. I hope you guys are learning something. It's some of these concepts about knowing what to counterspell are hard to grasp. He has left the game. We zapped him. It's a skill you learn from playing a lot of games with your deck and playing a lot of games against the common decks. Like, I don't want to come off like I'm bragging or anything, because I'm not, but like I called this. And that's very important. I always try and make a prediction about what my opponent's going to do at any given moment. Like, did I play enough things for him to planar outburst at some point of the game, if not on turn 5? Yes. I had a counter spell, that's what mattered. We didn't even draw particularly well, but we knew what we were doing. And that's the key. Celestial Flare. He lost the game. I know I didn't talk much about the improvements, but hopefully we can just add them and I'll make a video. And I hope you enjoyed it. April 6th, we'll take a look again.